Greetings, context of white supremacy, Gus T. Renegade, and Justice, and for another episode to share constructive information on the system of racism, white supremacy, what it is, and how it works. I want to thank everybody for either listening live or listening to the archive of the episode. Appreciate you all supporting the program. Hope it is worthy of your time and energy. Before we get into today's program, which I'm very excited about, again, please join the Facebook group. There's a link if you're listening from blogtalkradio.com. There's a link right on the upper right side of the page. All you have to do is click the Facebook link, and it'll take you right to the Facebook group for the C.O.W.S, Context of White Supremacy. You can join the group. You can talk about previous episodes, things that you think were constructive that listeners shared with us. If you have your own thoughts on the program, or if there are people that you would like to have on the C.O.W.S. Today's guest was recommended that very way. Someone who listened to the program, connected with me, thought today's guest had lots of constructive information to share that would be helpful for us, was able to contact her and get her on the program. So if there are people that you think would have something constructive to add to this discussion, join the Facebook group and let me know. Sign up. You can friend me on Facebook as well. All that information is right there on the webpage on the Blog Talk Radio site. So please join the Facebook. I would be very happy. And please check out the blog as well. It's been updated. I have 2 new posts and another one coming down the road. Address for the blog is racism-notes.blogspot.com. One more time, it's racism-notes.blogspot.com. As I said, today's guest, very happy about having her on the program. One of my listeners recommended that I get her on the show, said that he felt she had very constructive information to share about racism, white supremacy, told me about her book. He also sent me some of the lectures that she's given where she talks about the racial wealth gap. She'll share more information with us about that as we get into the program. She co-authored a book. It's titled The Color of Wealth, The Story Behind the U.S. Racial Wealth Divide. She is the former executive director for the United for Fair Economy, and currently she is the director of the Closing the Racial Wealth Gap Initiative, and this is a part of, the name of this group is the Insight Center for Community Economic Development. If you're listening at Blog Talk Radio, you can look in the show description and you'll see a link for their website. That's the Insight Center for Community Economic Development. You can click the link, go to their website. They have lots of helpful information in her site. She also has a spot on that webpage as well. You can check it out and get information more about her work. You can also get her book. Our guest for today's program, I'm super happy she could speak with us before she takes off for Hawaii. I'm very jealous. I'm going to botch her first name. I apologize, but the last name I will get. She can hopefully pronounce it correctly for me, so I will say it accurately. I think it's Meizhu Lui. Am I saying it correctly? And if not, please help me pronounce it the right way.
Hi, Gus. It's so nice to be on your show. I really appreciate it. And just to say that anything that is done to dismantle racism is constructive, so you have a very constructive show. And if you think of the months of May and June, it makes it easier. My name is Meizhu Lui.
Meizhu Lui. Am I saying it correctly?
That's right.
Meizhu Lui. Outstanding. Thank you. It is a real privilege to have you on the program. When I spoke with Miss Louis, you said Louis, right?
Louis. Mm-hmm.
Okay. When I spoke with Miss Louis prior to her coming on the program, she said, "Oh no, we're just going to wrap. You don't have to worry about reading the book." And I always get nervous when one of my guests says that, because generally white people say that, and then they come on the show and contradict things that they have said in the book. So I always make an effort to make sure that I read the book so I can be very knowledgeable about the guest that's coming on, and at least pretend that I'm competent about the subject matter. But yeah, I checked. Her book is phenomenal. I did read the whole thing. The book that she co-authored, phenomenal. It is chock full of, I don't really want to say good, it's kind of depressing statistics about the racial wealth divide between white people and non-white people. But it is fabulous, and she does a lot of excellent work. Could you please share with our listeners, just so they have a better sense of who you are and the work that you do?
Yes, well, I like to start with my own story because I think we all come to this work out of our own experience. So the first time I think I slammed myself up against the economic divide in terms of race was when I was looking for a job because I became a single mother, and I was pounding the pavement and found myself at the door of a Dunkin' Donuts. The manager who was interviewing me said, "Oh, you Chinese are good workers, aren't you?" So I said, so very good, because I really needed the job, and I knew that I was being stereotyped as going to be working twice as hard as everybody else, and that was a moment for me that a little bell went off, and I said, uh-oh, here we go. Here is the racial economic gap. So that sort of sent me on a lifelong crusade to see if I could do something to close that gap.
Wow. Very interesting. I think that sounds like a lot of non-white people, especially that I know of, who end up trying to work to replace white supremacy with justice. There's some moment that kind of crystallizes their mistreatment as a non-white person, whether it's Rosa Parks on the bus or Malcolm X talking about being in the classroom and being told he can't be a lawyer. Just some moment where it's like, hey, this racism thing is a big deal.
Exactly, that I have much smaller, narrower boundaries than the white folks that I see around me. And, for that reason, I like to say that actually most people of color come to this work and come to research more through their own experience. And in the book, the women who wrote the book together, and it was 5 women, we all started with our own stories. That's really where research begins. It's not with data, because behind every piece of data there are lots of stories. So we can start with our stories too.
I respect that completely. You already volunteered indirectly. You are a non-white female, is that correct?
I am Asian, and that's particularly one of the reasons I feel particularly thrilled to be on your show, because actually each of our groups of color often define ourselves in relation to whites. We spend all of our time trying to figure out how to get by them. So it's often kind of like up and down, us and the whites. And often we don't look enough across our different non-white groups and see the great similarities. So there are a lot of misperceptions among us, too, that need to be overcome in order for us to build our power to fight white supremacy. So I'm particularly happy as an Asian to be invited on your show.
It is double here. That is one of the key things that I really want to try and put more energy in. I agree 1,000% with what you just said about the importance of different non-white people making a greater effort to study how other groups of non-white people have been horribly victimized under the system of white supremacy, and in a lot of similar ways, so that we can...
So it helps us realize we're not alone in this. We've got allies that we really need to band together with. Definitely.
The name of this program, the C.O.W.S, Context of White Supremacy, I have unfortunately concluded that we are in a system of white supremacy, and the definition that I use when I use the term white supremacy is a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you think that such a system exists, and do you feel that that definition is accurate?
I absolutely do, and in fact, I think that the very term white was invented in the United States. I guess people in the United States can claim that as their invention. When you think about it, when the first folks from Europe set foot on this shore, it was not an uninhabited space. The Native Americans had been here for thousands of years, and their economy was thriving. They were doing quite well, and they were continuing to do so generation after generation. But the European colonists, they thought in their superior way, so this is where supremacy comes in, that the Native Americans were doing it all wrong, that really you shouldn't consider land and the natural resources as something that's available to everyone. It really should be parceled out into small private plots for the individual good of the owner. And the Native Americans had a really great point, which is if you didn't create the land and the resources, how is it that you can come to own it? But unfortunately for them, the colonists also had guns, and slowly they were forced off the land. So you're absolutely right that white supremacy is a system of taking from people of color and using it to profit only one group. But I think we'll talk about this a little bit more, but the whole category of white is one that never existed before that time, before the United States started to define that, because really even up until the 19th century, people from Europe who came did not think of themselves as white. They thought of themselves as Germans or Irish or British or French. Nobody said white, and that was a category that took time to construct, both for the white folks and for those who didn't qualify to be white.
Outstanding. As I said, real pleasure to have Meizhu Lui on the program today. My co-host, Justice, she is a non-white female, and she is all of 10 years old, but she understands we are in a system of racism, white supremacy, and she understands that that is incorrect, and she wants to learn as much as possible to try to correct that situation. She also has questions that she would like to ask, so I'm going to share microphone. Justice, if you are there, go right ahead and ask your questions.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello.
I hear you.
Okay. It might be a little noisy because I'm here, so. Okay. So, I was going to say that, can everybody speak at a low vocabulary level? I'm 10 years old. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice, and I will try to do that. I'm sorry.
Okay. And then, you have offspring, correct?
I have, excuse me?
You have offspring, correct?
Yes, I do. I do have a child.
Okay, one child. Okay. How do you help your offspring understand about white supremacy?
Well, again, I think it's your experience that teaches you, and what we as the parents need to do is to help you understand it. So for my son, we moved to a town there were very few Chinese in that town, and whenever we used to walk down the street, people would stare at us, and sometimes they would make those funny noises that they think Chinese sounds like chi-cha, chi-cha. So we would start to turn around and look back at them and kind of try to stare them down. But I tried to then explain to my son the reason that people were doing that, and the fact that just because we looked a little different, they had certain attitudes about us that were going to make our life a little bit difficult, that it wasn't about him personally, that there was nothing wrong with him, and he needed to be proud of who he was, but that the white folks in the town might look down on him, and he needed to just brace himself and become strong. And I think in many ways we are all stronger for our experiences, and that's something that is one of the hidden good things about our cultures. Gus, did you want to add to that?
No, thank you.
I thought that was brilliant. I don't have offspring, so I don't have as much to contribute to how you relate that information to a non-white child. So when the time comes, hopefully I'll be better prepared for it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think for all of us too, and Justice, this goes for you too, as you grow up, you will find that you might notice that people in your community are not doing as well as people who are white. They'll have maybe better education, better jobs. I know for my father, for example, when he got a job, he was happy to get a job, but then he noticed that there were white people who were hired after him that were rising higher than he was, a lot faster than he did, and it wasn't because he wasn't working hard, because he was working really hard. So I think that as we start to notice that, we cannot fall into the trap of saying, wait a minute, what's wrong with me? Maybe I'm doing something wrong, because a lot of times we do blame ourselves. and we have to stop that. We have to understand that that is coming from somewhere else. It's not because of us, and then we need to, again, gather ourselves together with other people of color to challenge the systems that keep us in an inferior position.
Outstanding. Justice, do you have some more questions you would like to ask?
No, not right now. Thank you.
Okie dokie. I'll come back in a second, see if she's thought of some more questions. I wanted to ask, since the book that you co-authored and the work that you do with the Insight Center for Community Economic Development really centers around trying to create more wealth and economic stability for non-white people. Do you think it's correct to say that the system of white supremacy is designed to create a wealth gap between white people and non-white people?
Well, let's talk a little bit about what we mean by system, because I think that can be confusing. And what we mean by that is the rules of the game. So the way that jobs work, the way that access to financial investments such as housing, all of that operates according to rules. And if you look at what those rules are, they really are not fair. They haven't been laid out in a way that allows different peoples of color to really be equal and have equal opportunity. We always hear about equal opportunity, but we have had rules ever since this country was begun that have not been fair. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. One is just from the Chinese experience, since it's not one that people know about as much. But we came to this country during the gold rush, the same that the Irish did, and a lot of people were coming here thinking that the streets were paved with gold and they were going to do pretty well. Well, the government of California at that time made rules that said if you were a Chinese miner, you were going to have to pay taxes, but other people that were miners that came from other countries wouldn't have to pay those taxes. So there's a gap right there. If I have to use what I earn to pay taxes and other people don't, I'm not going to be making as much from my work as they are. And the other thing is, because the Chinese were not allowed to become citizens, the taxes that they did pay, and at one point, one out of every $4 that went into the treasury of the state of California came from the Chinese. But they were not allowed to get any benefits from the tax system. They were not able to get the jobs. They were not able to get the services that California was providing to its citizens. So that's an example of some rules that really created the gap. But I would mention, too, that it is you do get a lot of benefits from being a citizen. And one of the very first laws that our country passed in 1790, which is not too long after the country was founded, was the naturalization law, and that means a law that sets down the rules by which an immigrant who comes here from another country can become a U.S. citizen. And it said you have to work hard. Okay, we could do that. It said you have to be loyal to the Constitution. All right, that I can do. You have to be of good character. You can't be a crook or something like that. So all right, the Chinese felt they could do that. And it said you have to be white. Well, at that time, as I was saying earlier, nobody really knew what white was. So the Chinese said, we can do all that other stuff, so why can't we be white? We want to have the right to be white. We want to have the right to be white so that we can become citizens. But they had to take their case to court, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And unfortunately, they lost their case because there was a myth that is completely untrue, but that the Native American people were descended from Chinese who many thousands of years before had crossed over a little land bridge from China into North America, and therefore the Native Americans were descendants of Chinese, and then therefore the Chinese must be Native American, so they couldn't be white because they already had decided the Native Americans couldn't be white. So we lost our case. So that's a way in which the rules are made. Again, when you had that law case and the Supreme Court made that decision, well, once and for all, the Chinese were not allowed to be white. So this is what we mean by system. This is what we mean by structure. The rules and practices that are put into place and upheld by the government really determine your place in society.
Outstanding. For our listeners, if you're checking out this program, Mr. or Professor Ian Hani Lopez, he authored stellar work, White by Law, and that book is all about the bulk of those court cases. Mr. Ozawa and Mr. Thin, all these individuals who went to court to petition to be a white person so that they could get citizenship and all the other goodies that go along with being classified as a white person, and just the devastation that occurred in their lives when they were denied those petitions and lost their citizenship or were not able to acquire citizenship and couldn't get land and, all the other adverse effects. That broadcast was in August, so if you check the archives.
Well, you mentioned Mr. Oshawa, who was a Japanese American, and he filed suit after the Chinese lost their case. He thought, he actually was already a fairly successful business person, and he thought he was contributing a lot to society, which he was. So he took his case to the Supreme Court, and it was ruled that the Japanese could not possibly be white because they were not classified as Caucasian. And he was so upset in thinking about the future for his children that he committed suicide. So a lot of this that seems kind of abstract when you think about the laws and things like that, but it has real effects on people. And to feel that you have come here and that you want opportunity and it's supposed to be the land of opportunity, and then you are denied it, that really hurts.
For sure. And Professor Lopez pointed out in that program the exact same justices, white justices, who heard Mr. Ozawa's case were the same people who heard Mr. Thin's case just a few months down the road. He was classified as a Caucasian, said, well, I got to be white since you said Caucasians are whites. Same people, just a few months down the road, no, you're Caucasian, but clearly you're not a white person. The white people, common knowledge was the term that they used, would not classify you as a white person. So no, you're not white either, and we're revoking your citizenship status. And a lot of individuals who had previously been classified as white lost their citizenship status after this court case. And as you said, devastating real-world ramifications for losing your classification as a white person or just not being classified as white to begin with. As you point,
and let me make 2 points on that. One is it's not that people actually wanted to be white. We like our countries of origin. We like our culture. We like our people. It's just that we feel that we should get the same rights and the same opportunities that people from Europe have. I mean, what's the difference between coming from Europe or coming from Asia or coming from Africa? I mean, we're all people, and we should have those same opportunities. So, again, it's not like we wanted to become white. We just wanted that classification. And the second thing is when you think about what you just said, Gus, the standard was the sort of the eyeballing, if you will, of white people, other white people. I mean, so again, that really shows in terms of white supremacy, that shows that anybody who was already classified as white, it became the legal standard. But even there, I have a slide that I show when I give talks sometimes of a couple from Ireland, and this slide is their marriage certificate from 1884, which is actually fairly late, practically 1900, and on it, it clearly says that their race is colored. So for those of us right now, we'd say Irish, colored, but that's what I mean by the people here. I suppose some white people looking at an Irish person wouldn't think they were white. Hard to believe, but that was going on at that time. People from Italy, they were a little bit darker skinned at first too. The people, especially from England, who were the first colonists, they didn't think they were white either, but many of those groups over time kind of passed the test, whatever it was, or it became more accepted, so they got to join the white club. And in a way, it's kind of sad because what all those groups had to give up was their identity as Italian or German or Irish. And again, that's not something that those of us who are not white want to give up. We might want the benefits of being a citizen, but we don't want to give up our cultures of being African American or Chinese American or Pakistani American or whatever it is. So I think, unfortunately, for a lot of the whites, they've already given something up for the benefit of being white.
That I think excellent point as well. That the non-white people not necessarily trying to be white, put that in quotes, but just all of the benefits, just undeniable benefits that you get from being a white person in a system of white supremacy. I mean, hey, you get a lot. Membership has its advantages for sure.
Absolutely. It's a club.
For sure. I wanted to be clear with the first question here. You want us to be very clear about what we mean when we say system, and you explained in terms of rules, the rules of the game, practices that are done, that are carried out every day in different areas of people activity. Do you think it's accurate to say that the rules of this game, the system of white supremacy, that the rules are designed to create a wealth gap between white people and non-white people?
They absolutely are. In fact, some of the earlier rules were designed, well, actually current ones too, designed to transfer wealth from people of color to white people. So the example I gave at the very beginning of the program was of Native Americans. So land is worth a lot, as we all know. Natural resources are worth a lot. And you saw that land being taken from Native people and given over to white people, so that you could be a very recent immigrant from a European country, and in the Homestead Act, you would be given 65 acres of free land. Well, when you say free land, it means you didn't have to pay for it, but it's not like that land wasn't being used and really wasn't the wealth of someone else. So we see that transfer. And I would like to say today we see something similar going on. We know that the mortgage companies specifically targeted communities of color, and I'm not only talking about the black community. The data shows that this was true in Asian communities, Latino communities, and Native American communities, that if you were qualified for a loan to buy a house at a fairly low rate, in other words, you were a good borrower, it wasn't very risky to lend money to you, that you had a good chance of paying it back, still you were steered into a loan where you had to pay a much higher interest rate, or it was the kind of a loan they call these exploding arms, which sounds pretty terrible in and of itself, but it means that you start out with a rate that's fairly low, and then the rate just explodes, and you find yourself, your payments going from a few $100s to a couple $1,000s a month. You clearly can't afford to do that, and so then you lose your house, you lose everything. So those types of rules, or lack of rules, because there was no regulation of those companies, and the idea of targeting one group over another was never really, there was no protection for people from our government. So that has led to a huge loss of wealth throughout our society, but it has hit communities of color particularly hard and has actually widened the wealth gap. So we like to see progress, and we are a country that likes to think that there is constant progress. And when President Obama was elected, you heard people saying that we are now in a post-racial society, that we really don't have to worry about race anymore, because that just proves that everything is just fine and everyone is equal. But if you just look at this whole issue of the housing crisis and the kinds of loans that were being given, and now the widening wealth gap between whites and people of color, you see that we're far from post-racial, but we still have a whole lot of work to do to combat these rules that promote racist disparities.
Again, Meizhu Lui, our guest on today's program, outstanding information. As I expected, as I said, I read her book. I didn't expect anything less.
And just to say, Justice, if there's anything that you don't understand and want to question, please do, because I want to make sure that you are with us here.
I do not have a question, but I do have I think it's a suggestion, but it's like white people, like the racists, they are like holding on to the lid, and then the non-white people are like inside of the bottle, and then since the white supremacy is like the cap, it's the cap, and then the cap is just like holding on to that.
That is just a really great picture that you're painting, Justice. That is really excellent. So yes, people of color are like caught in this bottle, And so we can't really get out, and we're sort of stuck with not as many choices as those who are outside of the bottle have, and they want to hold the lid on us because they think that if we get out, we'll get some of what they have. But really, their fears are not really true because we have a lot of talents. We have a lot to offer the people inside that bottle. For example, right now, there's not a lot of jobs and the economy is not doing very well. But if you let people of color participate more, they could start businesses, they could create more jobs, they could invent new things, and in fact, they know about what the interests and needs are of people of color that whites don't know. So there's whole markets that are being untapped here. So actually, the white people are hurting themselves. They're hurting us even more, but they are hurting themselves too. And we need to, we need to break out of the bottle, and we also need to convince them that it would help them too to let us out. But that was just a great picture. Thank you.
I agree wholeheartedly and have felt often that I am in a great bottle of sorts as a black person in the system of white supremacy. I wanted to ask, and I'm playing the non-white adversary here. If I was a white person and I'm reading your book or I'm at one of your presentations and I'm hearing you talk about this racial wealth gap, and I said, hey, I'm a white person. I didn't own any slaves. I've never called anyone any, racist names. I've never said the word nigger, or I've never called anyone a spick or a chink or anything like that. I have tons of non-white friends. I don't know what you're talking about in terms of, I need to do anything or I need to feel guilty about the home that I have or my retirement plan or my investments. I don't know what you're talking about. What would your response be?
Well, I would say, first of all, well, good for you. I'm really glad that you haven't called anybody names and things like that. You may feel that personally you haven't done anything, but that's where the whole story of wealth is one. It's more like a movie than a snapshot. We can't just look at what's going on right now, that you didn't oppress anybody, you didn't steal anything from a person of color right now. But you have to look at the rules throughout history that might have helped you get to where you are that you're not even recognizing. So, for example, a lot of people who are white are still benefiting from that free 60 acres of land that their ancestors might have gotten through the Homestead Act. That's a huge benefit because once you get that free piece of land, you can start to own things. You can start to make money for yourself. Now, when the African Americans were freed from slavery, at first they were promised 40 acres because it was recognized that if you only can sell your ability to work, you're never going to be able to gain any wealth or assets that will allow you to be independent. That's why we put so much emphasis on wealth and owning things like land and homes and other kinds of things. The fact that your ancestors got those free lands and once the slaves were freed, they didn't get something similar. And then the rules, especially in the South, kept African Americans in debt, so they would sell their labor, but they were being paid so little, and they needed to buy things from the whites that owned the stores and so on. So they stayed in debt and never were able to become independent. And then there are other rules throughout our history that you might not be looking at. So, for example, one example I like to give is Social Security. It's something that right now elderly people rely on. It's like money that you get when you're older because we all put into that system. But when that law was first passed, it left out a couple of occupations of work. And one was farm workers, and the other was like housekeepers that worked in people's homes, cleaning house for them. And those were the jobs that were held by both African Americans and Latinos. So look at this. If I'm white, my parents get Social Security, then whatever they have saved, they can give to me, and that can help me get a start. But if I'm African American or Latino and my parents aren't getting that, I have to use my income to help them live. So I not only am not getting anything from them, but I'm spending more money to keep them afloat. So again, we see a big disparity there, and over some generations, it's kind of like a snowball. Both the advantage and the disadvantage mount up over time. So the sad fact in the United States today, because we think of ourselves as a very mobile society where anybody can get ahead by hard work and so on, But even white people right now are not that mobile. If you're born into a low-income family, you're very likely to stay there. Something like 39% of people stay right where they are. But for African Americans, for some of these reasons that are rooted in the rules over many years, even if you're born to a middle-class black family, you're 45% of those children fall back into the poorest category over their lifetime. So again, the importance of having assets and passing them along is so important, and we need to do whatever we can right now to promote what we call asset building for people of color.
Wow. Again, context of white supremacy, our stellar guest for the day, Meizhu Lui. I've really, in your the book that you co-authored, The Color of, make sure I'm pronouncing it, The Color of Wealth.
Right.
I really enjoyed the fact that you pointed out for all the people, white people, suspected racists who complain about affirmative action, say, well, you know, the government shouldn't be doing these programs for a variety of reasons. It mistreats white people. We shouldn't be just, you know, giving away money to non-white people for something that happened 1,000 years ago. You really present a lot of really comprehensive information about how the government in this area of the world does things to help white people all the time and has a long history of doing things to help white people, whether it be the GI Bill that many veterans, particularly World War II, veterans were able to take advantage of and were able to go to school and get degrees and get, you know, great jobs and homes and Social Security, which you just pointed out, and the Homestead Act that you pointed out earlier. All of these government programs that give big boosts to white people and at the same time deny these opportunities to non-white people. It would be fabulous if you could share some of that information with our audience about the way that the government in this area is structured under a system of white supremacy to provide aid, subsidies to white people.
Well, yes, and I have to say that one of the chapters of our book was written by a white person, and in it they catalog the ways in which white people have benefited. So please read that chapter as well. And there are, of course, white people who do understand the benefits that have been given white folks and their families over a long period of time. And let me say, too, that there is nothing wrong with the government helping people. That, in fact, is the role of government. So for the people today who say, let's get rid of government, I mean, no, we still need government because government is the entity that represents people and is supposed to look out for the welfare of all of us. So the thing that was wrong with these programs was not that they existed, but that they limited the benefits to just one racial group. And it created a division in our society that, as we know, we still have yet to bridge. So just to mention a couple of items, I mean, we all know that to achieve middle class status, we all want to own our own homes. And in fact, that is a great way to gain assets because, you know, that home, you're not at the mercy of the marketplace. The rent can go up, the rent can, you know, you just don't know what's going to happen to you. But if you own something, you have a little bit more control over your life. And hopefully as you pay it off, you can leave it to your children and help them get ahead. Well, there was the creation of the Federal Housing Administration, and its role was to give low-interest loans to people so that they could move into the middle class and become homeowners. Once again, that program, though, was not opened up to people of color. And it wasn't open about that. You didn't know that, whether you were white or whether you were a person of color, but inside those offices, they were drawing red lines around neighborhoods that were largely non-white and saying those neighborhoods were too risky to give loans to, and therefore those neighborhoods never got loans. So if we look at some of the inner cities today and we say, look at all those people of color living and they're so poor and they haven't got this and they're not doing that, and most of the story is sometimes, well, they must be doing something wrong. But it all goes back to those, the Federal Housing Administration and drawing lines around those communities, preventing investment there, preventing ownership, and instead giving a lot of loans to people living in new white suburbs. In fact, out of the billions of dollars that were spent, and this is all of our tax money, so we're all paying for this. It's not only whites are paying for it. We're all paying into it. But 98% of all of those dollars went to white families and only 2% to families of color. So you could actually go through just about any topic and see what were the rules that prevented one group from getting something and another. So we talked today, too, about how important education is. Well, after the Homesteading Act, because a lot of those immigrants didn't necessarily know how to farm, we had the first public free colleges that were founded in different states. So pieces of land were given to states so that they could found colleges, and they were completely free for the farmers originally. And many of those universities remained free for quite a long period of time. At the same time that they were doing that, and there was also free public education that kept getting extended for children, citizen children, so that we have free public education all the way through high school. But what was going on in the earlier days, both for African Americans who were denied the right to read and write, and just to say how the system works, this didn't only work against the African American children. For white people who wanted to help African Americans learn to read, they were punished too. So it was punishable by law to teach someone as well. So the system enforces both sides. It discourages whites from doing anything that sort of helps anybody else, and at the same time it prevents those of color from getting any benefits. And for Native Americans, often they were at one point in history they were forced into boarding schools, taken away from their home, and put into schools far away from their families. And in the book, one of the authors talks about her grandmother telling her that when she talked in any Indian language, her mouth was taped shut. So if you have those kinds of experiences and it's pretty clear that you're being snatched from your families and put into a school in order to assimilate into a culture that you don't really want to assimilate into, your whole attitude toward education is going to be quite different. So I think we have to take all of these things into account as we look today at education and what has gone on over years. And certainly it is education, but right now what's holding people back is the cost. We see a really escalating cost of tuitions. And because we have this racial wealth gap, by the way, I don't know that I ever said what it was, but people of color as a whole have only 16 cents to the dollar that white people own, and that includes the values of homes, businesses, investments, luxury goods that can be sold, things like owning the Boston Red Sox might be in there. So all of those forms of wealth, only 16 cents to the dollar. But for African Americans, they're still the least wealthy in our society. They only have a dime for every dollar of wealth that whites own. So just wanted to make sure people knew the extent of this gap.
Wow, and I want to be clear, because your book, one of many great qualities of your book is that you break down. You have chapters that talk about how Native Americans have experienced racism, white supremacy, and the ramifications that has on their current economic status. And you talk about that for Asians. You talk about that for Latinos. You talk about that for Black people as well. If you could share, since you just said it was a dime, Black people have a dime to every dollar that white people have. Can you share what that would be for other non-white groups?
Right. Well, unfortunately for African Americans, it's the least, and it really goes to show, in terms of the system, the color-coded system that we have, because African Americans have been here the longest, and yet they still have the least amount of wealth. For Latinos, it's about 12 cents to the dollar. And for, actually there isn't great data on some of the other groups, but Asians probably do approach white more than the other groups, so they bring that up to closer to that 16 cents from the dime. But still, with the Asian groups, I just wanted to really make it clear that you have to break it out by different groups within that category. So the very, very poorest groups in this country today are the Hmong and the Cambodians, two groups from Southeast Asia. So on the other hand, we have some groups that are doing quite well. Chinese and Japanese are doing much better. But that's partly because all of the Asians are fairly recent immigrants. Maybe if they aren't immigrants today, their parents or their grandparents, it's the farthest back it goes. But many of them come from families that already do have some assets. And in fact, today, it's kind of the other side of immigration that's not talked about. It's not just low-income people coming here. It is people that are being recruited by high-tech industries, for example, and they're taking educated people from India and from China especially and bringing them here. And actually, the companies that are bringing them here are taking advantage of the fact that no one in this country had to pay to educate them. They're already educated, and then they take these jobs. And we really need to pay attention to better educating our own children, particularly in math and sciences, because these are fields that are going to be growing, and yet so few of our children are getting into college and into graduate schools. If we paid attention to that, that would really help us in the future close some of these gaps.
Wow. I want to make sure Justice, she's in, and she is asking questions as well. Justice, do you have some questions you would like to ask Ms. Lui?
I don't, not at this time, but I'll think of some more questions during the show.
Okay. I will get back to you so you can ask them once you think of a question or two. Again, our guest today's program, Meizhu Lui. I wanted to talk about, you and I are in agreement at least, that in the system of white supremacy, the rules are designed to create a racial wealth gap between white people and non-white people. You talk about this in your book, and I had already come to this conclusion, so it was great for me to read your book. It was just euphoric. Being a white person, we've already talked about it to some degree during the conversation, being a white person in a system of white supremacy, that is an asset in and of itself, regardless of anything else. Just being white in this system is an asset, the same way that being a non-white person would be a liability. Do you think that's true? And if you could share your view if you do believe that's true?
Well, I certainly do believe it's true. So, for example, in getting a job, how do people get a job? Do people really read all those resumes and pick the very best one, and how do they really know? I mean, it turns out that a lot of times you get a job because of someone that your father knows. So it's really, there's still that network that works, and unfortunately, again, since that those companies are dominated by white people in charge, it is less likely that you are going to be able to break into that system, into that job. And also, for some groups like Asians, even though we sometimes get those jobs, there is what we call a glass ceiling. We bump our head, like there's a stereotype that Asians are just not aggressive enough to be managers and so on, so we can only get so far. So yes, it absolutely is an advantage, and that is one of the things that people really don't see. And that is why we needed affirmative action. In other words, we needed to tell companies, we needed to tell schools that they have to figure out how to accept more people of color into jobs or into colleges and other places. And the government, too, needed to hire more as well. So, again, those were some of the rules, though, that helped us in the 1960s and 70s, but they didn't come free. They came through the hard work and the struggles of people of color to get those new rules passed. And so I think just to say that as we look at some of those rules, we need to start figuring out how can we change them to open up the system so that the rules really do create a fairness and not only kind of equal opportunity, but we need more than equal opportunity because we need to make up for all of those times where we were kept out, where we shouldn't have been. So in order to achieve that equality, we have to start looking at how can we change some of the rules. And the project that I'm working on now, the Closing the Racial Wealth Gap Initiative, that's really what we're trying to look at. We're trying to look at, okay, how can we make a new set of rules that will close this gap so that we really do have a more egalitarian society, hopefully by sometime in this century.
As soon as possible.
As soon as possible. It's way too late now. It's been way too long.
For sure. Could you share with us some of the things that you're doing? And again, this is a part of the Insight Center for Community Economic Development. Could you share, I guess, some of the suggestions or projects that you all are working on to try to replace the system of white supremacy with justice ASAP?
Yes. Well, one thing is we need people to keep track of how services and jobs and so on are being given out according to race. Sometimes we just don't have enough facts and figures to really make our case. So I started out by saying we know from experience, but the powers that be don't necessarily believe your experience, so you need numbers to support your case. So we really need to have more data collection. This is true in every aspect of life. For example, in health, we need to collect the data so that we know what the disparities are there. So we're not going to be able to solve the problems unless we have the facts and figures. And the second is I mentioned affirmative action, and I could put another way is targets. So, for example, right now there are dollars that are about job creation. Well, let's not just say everybody's equal in this. Let's target the dollars to those who are the most left out, who need the jobs the most. So unemployment rates for African Americans, for example, are double those of whites, and we've been freaked out as a country that the unemployment rate is reaching double digits. It's 9.5% for the country as a whole. But for African Americans, it has been 15%, 18%, and just as for young people, it's been over 33%. So it's like, 1 out of 3 young people who's looking for a job can't find it. Now, what is that going to do to their feeling of what they can accomplish? But how are they going to live? And so that's not unrelated to the incarceration rates, may I say. So we're just warehousing people because we are not figuring out ways to find them jobs. So targets is really important. Housing is another thing, too. Let's list all those predatory products that are out there, those loans, and make sure that they can't do that at all and they can't target them to communities of color. So there has already been a suggestion in Congress that we need, just like we have for toys, a protection agency that looks at toys so that we know they don't have lead in them. Well, some of the loans and the lending products were just as toxic as lead, and they have led to families being totally wiped out. So we do need a financial consumer protection agency, and that's something that's being debated right now. We need to look at different ways to build on the ways that our cultures do savings. So, for example, credit scores. Credit scores really determine your life. We've found out that even to get a job, sometimes they're looking at your credit scores, and you're like, wait a minute, if I fit the qualifications, what does my credit score have to do with it? But we really need to sort of undercut the power of the credit score, and we need to look at what are the practices in communities that may be able to prove that they are a good risk. So just to use an example from my own family, my father never wanted to be in debt. He believed in paying for everything in cash and didn't really understand how the financial system worked. So when it comes time for someone like my dad, though, where he does need a loan because he wants to maybe start a small business or to buy a home, something bigger than he can save up enough cash for, he finds out he has no credit, even though he's never been in debt. So it just doesn't even make any sense. So let's figure out other ways in which people can get the good credit that really reflects the practices of our communities. So I don't know if you've ever heard or had John Powell speak from the Kirwan Institute, but he talks about needing new policies right now that are universal but targeted. So we should look at every economic policy that comes down the pike and say, does this lift all of those at the bottom? Because numerically, there are still more poor white people than people of color, and we don't want to see white people being poor either. That's certainly, we're not saying let's just trade places. We're saying we have enough resources in our society to lift everyone up, but as we're lifting, let's also look at closing the gap. So that's where the targets come in. With every policy, let's figure out how do we really channel in positive ways to the groups that were the most left out before.
One out of many of the very constructive things that you just shared, you talked about the importance of having data and information so that you can make comparisons to see, this is housing rates for white people or home ownership rates for white people. These are home ownership rates for, black people, Latinos, Asians. Professor Lopez, when he was on the program, he talked about what he felt the new wave of racism, white supremacy, is going to be what he termed colorblind racism, where we resolve all this nonsense about racism by nobody will talk about racism. We won't track race. We won't keep records. We won't ask for it on employment applications. That will get rid of racism. And he feels, and I do too, that it will have the exact opposite effect, that you will not have data so that you can no longer make comparisons between this is what a white person would experience, or this is what a white person would get, and this is what a non-white person, because you won't have data to support any of those claims. How do you feel about that?
He's absolutely right. You're absolutely right. That is just another form of racism, actually. It's like sticking your head in the sand and saying, let's just pretend it doesn't exist. And when you're not confronting something that exists, there's no way that you're going to be able to deal with it. So that is absolutely right, and we do need that data. We have to show that even today in the 21st century, there are huge disparities, and they're growing right now. And if we can't document that, if we can't show that they exist, they'll just discount us once again, and things will continue to get worse once again. So we made a little bit of a gain in the 60s and 70s, but now there's some folks who want to say, well, you know, it's all fixed, it's all over, so let's pretend that we're all fine. And, you know, I like to say, too, that we always say, well, let's not talk about race. In fact, people talk about race all the time. It's just that they don't talk about it across races. You know, we're always talking about it in our own communities, whether those are white communities or Asian communities or what. It's a constant topic of conversation. So let's just talk to each other. Let's get it out in the open and really think about what can we do, especially if as a nation we're trying to promote ourselves around the world as the leading democracy. Well, that's probably one of the reasons they don't want the numbers. The numbers really put the lie to that fact. But if we really do, as a nation, want to live up to those ideals, then we're going to have to collect the data and then pass the policies that are going to change that data.
Again, our guest today, outstanding Meizhu Lui. She is with the Insight Center for Community Economic Development. I wanted to point, I'm kind of hopping off topic, but this is real important. This was addressed on a previous program. She's a black female professor at Northwestern University, Dorothy Roberts. She authored Killing the Black Body. She's also written other works as well, but that was the particular book we were talking about on the program. And she talked about how non-white females and black females specifically have been targeted and thoroughly abused, especially with regards to their reproductive rights. And she focused a lot on forced sterilization and experimentation with Depo-Provera and Norplant, these different contraceptives to prevent non-white females from having children. And you talked about that, or one of the authors in the book that you co-authored mentioned how females in Puerto Rico were subjected to these sterilization programs, and they were given, I believe it was Norplant, 30% higher dosage, and the result was that I believe a third of the females in Puerto Rico were, in quotes, voluntarily sterilized by, I believe it was 1970. And the book also pointed out that the area of the world known as Mexico and Haiti were subjected to similar programs. Do you think it's accurate to look at that as evidence of racism, white supremacy being practiced in these particular areas?
I certainly would, and not only that, I would say that for all of the white folks that are so anti-abortion and pro-life, where were they when that was going on? But let me relate just the reproductive issue to wealth. Slavery was abolished in most of the world before it was abolished in the United States. So as the slave trade dried up and you couldn't import slaves anymore, the only way to get more slaves and therefore more wealth, because each enslaved person was worth about $100 to that plantation owner, it was women, African-American women, who became the unit of production, if you will. So every child that was born became a new, a new number in the ledgers of the plantation owners. So yes, I think that creation of wealth by women of color is also a piece of this story in terms of the attitude toward women of color and their bodies. And then just to say another part of it, too, especially for Asian women, is the whole sex trade and the still buying, really, of Asian women from abroad as brides and hoping that they're going to work hard for less, like my Dunkin' Donuts manager said of me.
Wow. That is a topic that is really at the core of my focus in studying racism, white supremacy. I am a victim of white supremacy. I am not well informed about very much of anything, but that's one topic I feel fairly competent in talking about. Non-white people in sexual relationships with white people and the abuse that goes on worldwide in those relationships. Actually, I can plug a show. Richard Bernstein, he's a white person. He has written a book called The East, the West, and Sex. It is all about white men and sexual relationships with Asian females. The second chapter of his book is titled The Whole World as the White Man's Brothel.
Oh, my.
This is a white person who wrote this book, by the way. This is October 10th. He will be on the Cows, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. You hopped ahead of me, but I love this topic. So.
Terrific show, my goodness. And that is just so true. But certainly whites have gone around the world. We know with their military adventures, women have certainly borne the brunt of a lot of their bad behaviors.
I was actually gonna try to hit this topic going through hypergamy, but no matter.
Just a couple of other resources and people that you might think about. Again, there's a man named Iris Cas-Nelson. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he wrote a book, When Affirmative Action Was White. So he certainly could help to really illuminate all of those affirmative policies for whites over many years, as I've only been able to do very, very briefly. And then thinking about the health issues, there's a professor named Kamara Jones, and she's done a lot of work on health disparity. I just wanted to say one thing about the effects of racism and white supremacy, and to point people toward a film called Unnatural Causes, Is Inequality Making Us Sick? In one of the segments, there is an African-American woman who is very successful. She's middle class, owns her own home. She's a professional, married, and then she is having a baby. And she is shocked when the baby turns out to be premature, and it's a low birth weight baby, which is something we usually associate with poverty. So then the people in the film try to investigate what are the reasons for that. And they find that it is not a matter of race. In other words, there's nothing genetic about it, but it is a matter of racism, that people, even when they look like they're doing fairly well, are subjected to daily stresses in their life, like never knowing if the taxi might not stop for you, or if someone in a store might target you and accuse you of stealing something, or just all of the little indignities that we suffer. In this case, it just shows how that type of stress can suppress your immune system and lead to bad health outcomes. So again, this is not just, I do concentrate on wealth and the financial aspect, but we're talking about all areas of our lives.
Mm-hmm. I want to highlight what you just said because I think that's very important, and I believe I should have a show specifically focused on just racism being adverse to the health of non-white people coming up next month. But I have had other individuals who have come on the show who have said just being non-white in a system of white supremacy has devastating ramifications on your health. Are you saying evidence that you've seen would support that that is a true statement?
Absolutely, and they've done not just sort of talking with people and finding out that that's true, but they've also have biological evidence as well.
Okay, yeah, I believe her name is Dr. Nancy Krieger. She is a white female, and she is at Harvard. I was told she has done the most and best research on this subject. She's supposed to be coming next month. So,
that's wonderful. Yes, she's one of the groundbreaking leaders in that field.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. That stuff to look forward to on the Cows.
Yes, absolutely. Good.
Hello?
Oh, yes, ma'am. Justice, go right ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that how can non-white people can gain wealth?
Well, first of all, there are things that you can do as well as things that the whole country needs to do. So one thing that you can do, that anybody can do, and it's not, it is hard, but is save. So it really starts with savings. And right now, we're not really encouraged to save, but that is something that we need to do, and we can start doing it at whatever age. If you have an allowance, you can put a few dollars aside. Because in the way that the banks work, when you put your money into banks, sometimes that money can grow. I would say, too, we have to be careful of some of the traditional banks, but sometimes there are community credit unions or other places where you can put your dollars so that they will grow. They won't just stay the same, but they will grow. And that is how some of the white folks have gotten their money. But then we also need rules that encourage people to save. And one of the things that has been started is programs where if you save a certain amount of money and you're pretty low income, either the government or somebody else will match your dollars. So if you put in $20, you'll get an extra $20. So that encourages you to save more and more. So certainly it all begins with savings. So when you accumulate wealth, it happens over a lifetime. It starts in your childhood, and it might not be just you, but it might be your parents that put aside money for your college tuition. But then as you get older, hopefully you won't take on too much debt, and that's another thing we need to tackle. So not using a credit card for everything, not getting into trouble with credit card debt is something that you're going to have to do. But again, we need the rules so that the credit card companies can't rip you off as they have over time. And we also have to make sure that colleges are more affordable, so that because college and education, including vocational education, are ways that you can get the skills to get a better job, and then you can set aside money out of your income too. So those are just examples of some things that we all can do. But once again, it's both what you do yourself, but it's also having a government that will encourage you to save, that will protect your savings, and that will try to do things that target more dollars to you and your community.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yes.
You have a savings account?
Just on piggy bank.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a start.
Do you have some more questions, Justice?
And I love your name, by the way, Justice.
Thank you.
A name with an objective.
Yes, I know. It means that you're going to have to live up to your name.
I forgot what I was about to say. I will think of some more. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was my fault for interrupting. Sorry. I wanted to ask, I had a question, but actually a person in the chat room, they wanted to know, I'm going to read it verbatim so that way I don't get in trouble. Their question is, why do some Asian people think that they are better than Africans or African Americans, black people in general? I think that's a good question because you touched on that in your book.
Well, I think that when people come to this country, they learn how the system works, and they learn that there is such a thing as white supremacy. So some people, unfortunately, try as hard as they can to be white or to be like the whites because they want to be on top. If you are, and I remember this from when I was in school, Justice, just for you, like when I was in grade school, I can remember I couldn't figure out why it was, but I could see that the white kids were the ones that were getting the best attention. They were the ones who were, selected to be kind of special kids, and then later they were the prom queens and stuff like that. Luckily, that's changed a little bit. But when you come to this country, you see what's going on, and then you see other people of color, African Americans, not being treated in those ways. You don't see them as leaders. You don't see them in the government. You don't see them heading up companies. So you start to, you can't quite figure it out, and then you hear on the media all of the negative stereotyping of people of color. So you sort of adopt those attitudes, and unless you have opportunities to really interact with people, or if you don't study, and then one way that helps too is when you bump up against that glass ceiling or somebody takes you down, then you start to think, oh, wait a minute, maybe it isn't the fact that other people of color are not working so hard. Maybe there's something else going on for them as well. But I guess I would say that there are some Asians that feel that way, certainly, but there are many of us who do not. And frankly, if you look at somebody like Clarence Thomas, he thinks he's better than other African Americans. I mean, he was like dissing his own sister. So I think we have people among us always that just have it wrong. And it's the job of all of us to help educate, especially the people in our own group. So certainly that's partly my job, is to work with other Asians to help them understand how the system works. And so I really appreciate your question, and I know it is one that many people have. But in a way, it's a stereotype too. So don't believe everything you hear in the media, because all of that comes through sort of a white lens.
You actually touched on in your book, I think the one specific example that was pointed out in the book you co-authored was talking about the riots in Los Angeles with the whole Rodney King thing, and how the system of white supremacy can kind of play one non-white group into being in conflict with another non-white group, and nobody really stops and turns and says, wait a minute, I think white people might be causing a lot of these problems. Instead, the non-white people will just fuss and bicker amongst each other, as would happen with so-called Koreans and black people in Los Angeles.
Right. Divide and conquer is a successful strategy that has been done since day one. And actually, it's also used around the world by European powers. So if we look at the Hutus and the Tutsis, I mean, many of us were like, wait a minute, why are these two groups so vicious against each other? But actually, the Portuguese, when they went in there, they created a system where one group was slightly over the other group. So whenever you give advantages to one group, that creates a resentment by other folks. And so I think certainly in our country, there was no natural reason for African Americans, Asians, Latinos, and whites not to get along. But when you create a system where some people created that system, and it was the richer capitalists who created that system, that whites were going to get more advantages, then you set the conditions for people to be divided. And actually, it's not in the interests of whites either. But I think as time goes on and our country becomes more majority-minority, as it is trending that way, it is very important for us to get over our stereotypes about each other, to talk more with other people so that we can be united and create a better system.
For sure. I want to make sure, Justice, because I interrupted her, I think I caused her to forget her question. Did you remember your question, or did you have other questions that you wanted to ask, Justice?
No, but I do have a comment.
Okay.
My comment is that thank you for the information so far.
Well, thank you, Justice. I really appreciate your being here.
Me too. Justice is great. I'm very thankful for her participating in the program. I wanted to touch on, we're going to take some callers as well, because folks are calling in and they have questions that they would like to ask you. The number, if you want to call in, I'll give out real quick. Anybody listening in is 347-215-6071 if you want to call in and ask Ms. Meizhu Lui. If you want to ask her questions, feel free. You talked about the system of white supremacy using non-white females, using them to create labor, to create wealth during slavery. In my view, this continues. I feel that in the system of white supremacy, non-white people have been explicitly at times capital for white people and the production of wealth. And I feel this continues today. I feel the prison complex is a glaring example of this. Do you feel that's accurate in a system of white supremacy, that non-white people have been and continue to be used as capital and as a source of wealth for white people?
Yes. Well, in order to create wealth, you need a couple of different things. First, you need land, and by land, I also mean natural resources. Like, you really can't make anything unless you have some raw materials. So that's one thing. So we see all over the world where resources are being captured by European countries, and it really goes on in our own neighborhoods as well. So if you look at, for example, where a lot of toxic, unhealthy materials are stored and kept, it tends to be in communities of color, so sort of like ruining their environments instead of using other people's environments, and then after you've already extracted everything from the land. So for Native American communities too, it's interesting. They still own quite the reservations. There's still quite a lot of land that is owned. But Rebecca Adamson says that they may be land rich, but they're dirt poor, and that's partly because they have not been able to control the land. That still has been controlled by the government. A lot of that land has been put in trust, so they can't do with it what they want, and they haven't been able to utilize the land to create wealth for themselves. Besides natural resources and land, you also need labor. And certainly in terms of slavery, it was the free labor of African Americans that created all that wealth for whites. And it has been estimated that if African Americans had only been paid wages during those years of slavery, there would be about, this is at a minimum, about $4 trillion in today's terms that would be circulating in those communities. And you can imagine how different our society would be if there was that much wealth in the black community right now. So labor, too, in the sense of being able to use other people's labor, not paying them really as much as they are worth in terms of what they're producing, so that all the profit is going to the company. And one great example today is Walmart. That's not only people of color, but they pay people so little. And then the 5 Walmart brothers and sisters, they each have a $15 billion each one of them. So altogether, that's even more than Bill Gates has.
Wow.
So yeah, so labor continues to be something that is exploited, and particularly like right now, if we look at Latinos, we see this whole idea of guest workers. So in other words, you bring them into the country when you need to bring in the crops, but then you throw them out again when you don't need their cheap labor anymore. Now, I say that guest worker, I don't think we'd treat any of our guests that way, like, invite you to come in and do the dishes, you can go home. So you're absolutely right. And then the last thing that you need really to start some ownership is capital, and by capital I mean money and access to money, but also tools. So if you think about the 40 acres and a mule, that mule was a tool. It was like capital. It was something you needed in order to really make that land productive. So right now, again, you have a lot of people of color who would like to start businesses or who do start little tiny businesses. Maybe they just work for themselves at first, but the banks are very unwilling to give them access to capital. They're not willing to loan them the money. So that far more people of color, twice as many people of color, end up starting little businesses using their credit cards. And you know how high the interest rates are there. So in all of these ways, land, labor, and capital, we are seeing ways, in which people of color are being exploited or left out of the game.
Wow. I had a couple, and then I'm going to go to the phone lines. I actually wanted to share, hopefully this will entice people to pick up a copy of The Color of Wealth, because it does have a wealth of informative information, no pun intended. One of many, and I can't really say these are good stacks. They're pretty depressing, but, it's important to get this information so you can, get a more accurate picture of what's happening. She pointed out in her book that amongst black people in this area of the world, the black people who do have money they make 8.7 times the median income of other black people, which means that there is, the black people that do have money, they have a lot more money than most of the other black people. When you look at white people, the white people who have a lot of money make only 2.6 times the median. To me, wow. Number one, white people on the whole have a lot more money than white people. Even the wealthy black people have a lot less money. In fact, in her book, it was, she said 1/3. The wealthy black people have 1/3 of the income that wealthy white people have. But just the fact that that gap is so big between the black people who do have money, the Oprah Winfrey's, Bill Cosby's, and just regular black people, looking at white people, the wealthy white people only having 2.6 the median income of regular white people, just shows you don't have such a stratification between having, quite a lot of money and just being average, regular old white person. Really, in my view, really works to distort the picture of progress if you can put up one or two, and she talks about this in The Color of Wealth, if you can put up one or two or a handful of non-white people who do have a lot of money, it really distorts the fact that the overwhelming majority of non-white people really don't have that much money. I think she talks about that a lot in her book. If you want to share more information on that, that would be great as well.
Well, we look around, and this is one of the reasons people say that we should have a colorblind society, because they say, oh, well, look at Oprah Winfrey. Look how much money she is. It shows that anybody can get rich. She was on welfare once, and look, now she's got $1 billion. So it just goes to show the system's working for everyone. Well, first, as you mentioned, I mean, the wealthiest people, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, they both have around $60 billion, and she only has one. And then if you get down to like the 10th wealthiest person in the United States, and the top 10 are certainly all white, but that's the Walton brothers and sisters, and as I mentioned, they have $15 billion. And if you get down to the bottom, the 10th in the African American column, it's only hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's far, far less, even though it seems like a lot of money. So there's still that huge gap, even at the top, between people of color and whites. But you mentioned, and it is interesting, that there is a bigger gap really within the African American population than between whites and African Americans than within the white population. And in some ways, I think it is partly to keep reinforcing this myth. So to use Justice's image, if we let a couple people out of the bottle, then everybody will think, wow, the system has changed and everything's cool. But it hasn't. We're just letting a few out in order to make it look like everybody has a chance. But that bottle is tighter than ever, and you mentioned incarceration. I mean, the numbers of people we have and the disproportionate number of young people, especially of color, is really appalling. We have more people incarcerated in this country than per capita than any country of the world, and we're always, this always bugs me because we're always saying, like, China has such a poor human rights record, blah, blah, blah. Well, we actually lock up more people and keep them locked up than China does. And for us, too, it is by race, so we have that undemocratic tendency, again, which I'm not going to defend China because it's not doing that great either, but we're not any ones to throw stones. Yeah.
Oh, I wasn't interrupting. I was just agreeing.
Oh, no. I think I was starting to ramble a little, so go on and let your listeners ask me some questions if they've got some. That would be great.
Sure. Justice, did you have a question?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Why do a lot of so-called Asians work at nail salons?
For many groups, there are not jobs that they can get in the regular employment market. Like, they might not be able to get a job, I don't know what the big companies are in your town, but maybe they don't speak English that well, or for whatever reason they don't know people, so they're not going to get hired. So a lot of people tend to open up their own businesses. And often they'll open up a business that nobody else has thought of or that nobody else wants to do. So early on for the Chinese, it was laundries, and you probably have heard, or maybe there's still a Chinese dry cleaner in your neighborhood. But originally, those were jobs that nobody else wanted. So the first Chinese laundry started in mining towns. It was all men, and white men didn't want to do their own laundry because they thought that was women's work. So there was a niche to be filled. So the Chinese did that kind of work, and they did that. So now today, to use your example, a lot of Vietnamese, for example, have figured out that there's a niche, which is the nail salon industry. So a lot of them have opened up those things. And then because we all have our network, so there's a white network, but there is a Vietnamese network as well. They tell their friends about it, and their friends might start working with them, but then they might start their own little business in another part of town. But I have to say, one thing about these jobs is they're really unhealthy, because when you are breathing in all of those fumes from nail polish and nail polish remover, it's not all that healthy. But anyway, I hope that explains a little bit about why they are in those little stores, little nail salons.
I totally agree. Thank you.
Thank you. And I was going to ask you, too, I was going to say, our country is totally obsessed with wealth. Like, we have all these TV shows about everybody wants to be a millionaire, and everyone wants to marry a millionaire, and everyone wants to eat weird food so that bugs and stuff in order to win $1 million. And $1 million seems like a lot of money, but we have now so many billionaires in our society, and I just wanted to say to you, it's hard to even know the difference between $1 million and $1 billion. But if you think of a dollar as 1 second, it takes about 11 days for 1 million seconds to go by, but it takes more than 30 years for 1 billion seconds to go by. So that shows how much more 1 billion is than 1 million. So you're thinking wow, how could anybody even think about spending $1 billion? It's just who needs that? So in terms of what's going on in our society today, we need to not only lift up people who don't have so much money, we need to get some of that money away from those people. They don't need that much, and one way we can do that is through taxing them more. There's no reason they should get to keep all of that money.
That what she just said, I suspect, among many other things she said in her book, is why she describes herself as a professional troublemaker. Let's see, 253, if you are there with a question or comment. You are on the line, 253, question, comment? 253? No.
Yes, hello, can I be heard?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Kind of maybe possibly a little off topic, but I know there's a lot of confusion around, especially for non-white people, and I just wanted to get the participants on the call take on the situation, namely the guest, possibly you, Gus, possibly Justice too, but just wanted to know, there's what's your take on if indeed a white person can be a victim of white supremacy?
Can a white person be a victim of white supremacy? No, I don't think they can. However, they can be a victim of class supremacy. So that in some ways this category, maybe I'm actually agreeing with you a little bit, so that the fact that they identify more as white than as a working person, in some ways that comes around to bite them, so that they don't ally with people of color on a job, for example. So rather than saying, let's all fight for better wages and working conditions, they identify more with the white boss, and that does hurt them in the end. So maybe I'm changing my mind. Maybe I'm saying yes, that white supremacy can hurt them too.
Well, no, I'm just to be clear, I take the position that a perpetrator of a crime cannot be also a victim at the same time. So I would say a white person definitely can't be a victim of white supremacy. But I agree with you as far as they can be a victim of other things, classism or not getting paid enough or whatever the case may be. But victim of white supremacy. I couldn't see a white person being that.
Yeah, well, I was with you that I didn't think they could be a victim of it, but then I just thought it doesn't really serve them well. So they're not necessarily a victim of it, but it doesn't serve them well because in the end they're not really uniting with the right people. So if they're going to defend Bill Gates, oh yeah, he's got a right to be a gazillionaire, and I'm not going to unite with the the person of color that I work right next to every day in order for us to get a little bit more in comparison to Bill Gates, then I think it is hurting them, yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that point to say that, a white person would be better off trying to eliminate white supremacy and replace it with justice than just maintaining white supremacy.
Absolutely. So we have our work to do to convince them of that.
Thank you for your response. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you. Thank you to non-Meizhu.
Thank you. 916, do you have a question or comment? (916), are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hi, Gus. This is Jamie, a.k.a. Kemet is in me.
Oh, how are you doing, sir?
I am fine, sir. How are you?
I am being victimized as usual, but trying to be constructive and make the best of it.
Yes, so am I. I just wanted to, I didn't get a chance to hear the show. I just called in not long ago, so I just heard the last maybe 5 or 10 minutes. But I wanted to make sure that if the show, if people felt that the show was not constructive, that they could send me an email, because I am one of the people that requested that you have her on your show. So I can give my phone number and my email address right now.
That's all your fault.
If they feel that this show was not constructive, my email address is jneroo@comcast.net. My phone number is 916-676-2756. Gus, I also want to thank you for the show. I will go back and download it. I'm sure it's been very constructive, very informative. Ma'am, I do have one question for you.
Sure.
Regarding your book. I haven't read it yet, but I wanted to know if in your book you make a distinction between not only the races but also gender.
We do. There definitely are gender differences, but to be honest with you, we were going to write a whole chapter on gender, and then we got tired. We were like, it needs to come out. But right now, I'm working on a project, so I'm not really just an author. I'm really more of the troublemaker. So right now, the project I work on is called Closing the Racial Wealth Gap, and we do have a whole committee that is working on the issue of women of color and wealth. So there will be more information on that, and there is really interesting information about that. And we will be also trying to figure out what are some policies that we can pass to close that gap, because women of color are at the very bottom of the barrel. So as bad as it is for everyone else, women of color, get it both ways. And let me just go back to I opened up with my story about getting a job at Dunkin' Donuts and the manager telling me, oh, you Chinese are good workers. And I knew at that moment that I was going to be asked to work twice as hard. But there was also a gender gap, too. It was like only men were allowed to be the donut makers, and women were only allowed to serve the donuts. So it took, again, it was only because of the struggles of people of color and women where we passed laws for equal pay for equal work and opened up the employment market, at least in the 60s and 70s. I feel like we've gone backwards again, but at least you do see now at Dunkin' Donuts, you see more men who are servers, and I hope there's more women in the back who are making the donuts. Yes, both of those factors come into play, so women of color still are the poorest people in this country.
Wow. And then one last thing before I hang up. Is Justice still on the line?
Yes.
Well, I just want you to know how proud I am of you, as well as how jealous I am of you, because I wish someone would have sat me down and explained to me the system that we were all living in. So I went around bumping my head and getting in all kind of trouble things that you will be able to avoid, I hope, because you're armed with far more information than I was when I was your age. Not to mention you're very smart. So I just wanted to let you know how proud I am of you.
And I really second that emotion. And I think, too, that one of our tasks as older people is to make sure that the younger generations have a better understanding so that, once again, they don't feel that they're doing anything wrong, but they understand what is happening and take action to change it.
Great. Well, that's all I have. In closing, I just want everyone also to know that I am a non-white person classified as black or African American. I get so many labels, it's unreal. But I have curly hair, so sometimes people think I'm Cuban and, you know, all these other things. But
not white.
Well, here we
not
go
white.
Here we go back to the eyeballing again. But I do thank you, too, for suggesting that I come on this program and, you know, to reinforce that that part of the point that we want to make here is that we often focus a lot just on income because, you know, I mentioned the unemployment figures that were pretty high, and, of course, we do need a job and we do need income. But and as to Justice's question, too, about how do you get wealth, sometimes we, and especially our younger people, mistake wealth for stuff. It's not a matter of having a lot of stuff. It's really having what we call assets. In other words, things that have not only have their own value, but that can create more value. So wealth is actually even more important than income in some ways. So income I like to say we could just as soon call income outgo because in it comes and then out it goes. But if we don't have anything left over at the end of the day, we're never going to get ahead. We're never going to be able to use that money to make more money. We're not going to be able to have credit to borrow in case we hit a hard time. And we're not going to be able to pass it on to the next generation. So if we want our children and the succeeding generations to be able to be economically mobile and secure, we're going to have to really pay attention to wealth.
I totally agree with you.
Well, thanks so much.
Oh, thank you for coming on, and thank you, Gus, for being able to reach her, and I'm just glad she accepted your proposal. I'll go back and listen to it, but I'm sure it's been very constructive.
Thank you, and thank you for the recommendation. I learned a ton reading her book, The Color of Wealth, and I, too, am very grateful that she was willing to share some of her weekend with us before she goes off to Hawaii to and hopefully do something constructive against white supremacy while she's enjoying the warm weather and beaches.
Definitely issues in paradise, too.
Let me see. We got somebody else called there at 111. I can't see your area code, so if you called in and you haven't said anything, you're on the line.
Greetings, Renegade.
Greetings, 720. How are you doing, sir?
I'm okay. Victimized. Greetings to you, Justice. And greetings to you. Hi. And greetings to you, Meizhu Lui.
Hi.
I wanted to go off topic just a moment so I could say something to Justice also. You know, Justice, when I was a bit younger and as I was growing up, my mother was trying to speak with me one day, and I thought that I had learned a lot, And she looked at me and she said, "Boy, let me tell you something." She said, "I don't care if you get to be 150 years old." She said, "A 5-year-old can tell you something and teach you something that you didn't know." And she told me never to forget that. So I want to let you know, Justice, I'm very thankful and very grateful because you've taught me a lot being on this show. So thank you.
You're welcome.
And I have a question for you, Meizhu Lui.
Mm-hmm.
I see, well, from listening to Renegade's show, I get the impression, and I've almost come to the conclusion that even the most well-intentioned white people and those who claim to be fighting white supremacy. It seems when things are touched upon deep down within their core, it seems as though they really have no intention of changing anything. This has been the impression I've gotten, particularly from listening to, like I say, the most well-meaning white people who have been on Renegade's show. And as regards wealth and changing the situation with wealth and assets, as you're saying, how do you feel about that?
There's that old saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So I think that is kind of speaking to your point. One of the project I'm working on, the Closing the Racial Wealth Gap Initiative, one of our strongest principles is that any policy discussion or any changes needs to really be informed by people of color. We cannot have policies that are created by white people allegedly on our behalf, because I think, as you're saying, even though they have the best of intentions, and some of them I think sincerely want to create change, but the supremacy part of it is that they think they can do it for people, and they might not be thinking that consciously, but they don't make the effort they need to really reach out and listen to and then involve and then to elevate to leaders on this question, people of color. So just to give you an example, there's a lot of data out there, not enough, but there is some. Just this whole idea of the Asian model minority myth is one example that I feel strongly about. So if you look at some of the data, it looks like Asians are doing quite well, but I think what we all are getting is an interpretation of that data by white people. So they're saying, oh, it's no problem. Asians are doing just fine. In fact, they're doing, just as good as white people are. And why can't the rest of you people of color just get with the program and do what they do? But it's only the experts themselves or people who live in the communities that understand what's behind the numbers. So just to give you an example, it looks like Asians have high rates of home ownership, although they're still lower than whites. 3 out of 4 white families own their own homes, while 2 out of 3 Asian American families own their own homes, and 1 out of 2 African American and Latino. But if you look behind the numbers, Asians do it in a different way. Rather than like a nuclear family where it's a mother and father that buy the house, often it is an extended family, and their names might not even be on the paperwork, but it is like mother, father, sons, daughters, aunts, uncles that are all paying in. So it's not just one salary or 2 salaries, it's a whole bunch of them. So again, you have to really look behind the numbers to figure out what's going on. And so even those well-intentioned white people, as you're saying, they don't really understand it enough to be able to make good recommendations. So I think, again, this idea of universal but targeted policies, if they're simply universal, it's like if you go into a store and all they have is one size of shoe, that shoe doesn't fit everybody, and the shoe we're being asked to put on is kind of the white person's size shoe, and it doesn't fit our cultures and the way we do things. So we really need to do this ourselves. So I hope that answers your question, or that's my view.
Interesting. I do have another question regarding that. I think you said earlier in the program there was a white person that helped to write the book?
Yes, they wrote the chapter on whites, because we do have a chapter on white benefits.
I have another question. I've noticed more and more increasingly that so-called Asian women are marrying or getting together with white men. As regards wealth, do you think that that's a big part of why they are doing that? And do you know any so-called Asian women who are doing that, and have they talked about why?
Well, there are many. We talked a little bit earlier just about the men seeking out Asian women many times from abroad, because they think women born in the United States are too uppity. They think they have too many rights and they're going to give them too much of a hard way to go. So they want somebody that is submissive and subservient, and that is the stereotype of Asian women. I hope some of them find out that that's not so true once they take that step. But particularly the women who come from other countries, yes, sometimes it is for economic security or for moving up in the economic world. It is a more practical decision than anything else. So I think you're right about that. Actually, when Mexico was annexed, the Mexicans did not have the system where only men can inherit property that we had in the United States up until very, very recently. So if a Mexican woman married an Anglo man, he got her land. And so you might say that at that time the men were marrying women of color for economic reasons. So just to kind of throw that into the mix.
And do you know any so-called Asian women who have spoken specifically on the question that I asked?
Who have spoken as to the economic reasons for that kind of marriage?
Yes, for a non-white person being with a white person.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I thought I answered that, especially with immigrant women. That's certainly true, and the Asian population is quite heavily immigrant right now. But I guess I would ask you, why do you say so-called Asian?
Well, because the classifications are given by white people, white supremacists. That doesn't mean that they are in actuality that way.
So you're saying, like, how do people define themselves? Yeah, it's just that I didn't hear you say so-called white or so-called black. So I just wondered if there was some particular reason why you use that with Asians in particular.
Well, because, I'm speaking with you, and I think that you said that you're an Asian person.
I am.
And so, as regards so-called Asian people, I figured the person I could best get information from about so-called Asian people or Asian women doing the things that I'm seeing in greater numbers, the best information would come from a so-called Asian person.
Okay. All right. No, I'll accept that. But I think, just as I was saying that for whites, in the earlier days of immigration, people didn't say, I'm a white person. They said, I am a German or I'm a French or something like that. And probably when Africans were first brought over too, they would probably identify by tribe. And it was over a period of time that an African-American culture across tribes was created. I think similarly for Asians, like I am Chinese American, and there are Japanese Americans, Filipino Americans, and so on. But as the generations go on and we realize that we are more alike than different because of the way that we're treated within the society, that's when we start to use the more generic category of Asian American.
Okay. But I'm not sure if I got it.
1 second, 720. I wanted to make sure I get. There was one more person that called in. I wanted to see if they could get a question, and then I'll come back and get your next question there. Just hang tight for me, please. 720. I'm getting another 111. I can't see the area code, so if you called in and you have a question, you are on the air.
Greetings. Am I on?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, yeah, okay. Greetings, Meizhu Lui and Renegade and Justice. I just wanted to find out, I want to go over to China. What is the perception of a black person over there, and especially with locks? And what are some more recommendations you can give me?
I would say that it varies. There are people in China who have unfortunately adopted some of the racist attitudes that they've seen from other parts of the world. So, for example, at one point there were many African students in China. It was actually the policy of the government to really promote relations between Africa and China, but there was some backlash. On the other hand, there are a lot of people who really are both kind of look up to Africans. For example, a friend of mine just went to China, and he said people almost looked at him like a Buddha. They were just amazed, especially because he's a little bit round. So they just were like just amazed and fascinated, and really looked up to him in that way. So in general, I think people will be friendly and will appreciate your interest in being there and in learning more about China.
Well, thank you for answering my question, and I'll definitely purchase the book because I think it's very important for people to have those kind of dialogues.
Well, have a wonderful trip, and we would probably all be very interested to find your experiences when you get back.
Definitely. Do you have an email address? Is it on the chat room? Or?
It is actually, it's my whole name, Meizhu Lui @gmail.com.
At gmail.com. I'll keep you posted.
Oh, thank you.
Justice, did you have a question? Have you been thinking of anything?
Yes. Have you do you know any other Asian people besides you that know about white supremacy?
Oh, absolutely. There are many, many Asians who are part of the movement against white supremacy and for racial justice, not just for Asians, but for all. In many ways, I think many of us learned a lot from the African American movement when the civil rights movement started in the 60s and 70s. That's when the Asians really mobilized the most and started to explore their own Asian American identity and to organize and to fight for rights, both joining the civil rights movement for equal rights for African Americans, but extending that to say for all people of color. So I think especially people in the 60 generation and beyond, I think there are tons of Asian Americans who understand this and who are working to change it. The person I can think of that to refer you to is Jeff Chang. He's done a lot of writing on race and just the interrelationship, too, between African American and Asians. So that would be someone I would refer you and your listeners to, Gus, as well.
Jeff Chang?
Yes.
Name that. Okay.
And then also, have you written any books for kids?
No, I have not. I will say about the book, and maybe Gus can reinforce this, we tried to write it in a way that it wasn't just for people with many degrees behind their name. We tried to write it in a way that, people, ordinary people could read it and get something out of it. But no, it's not yet for children, though, so maybe that's something that's needed. And again, Justice, that is a great suggestion to have more books that explain what's going on that are written for younger people. You've given me a homework assignment for my future writing. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can co-sign on Ms. Louise's commentary with regards to the book, The Color of Wealth. It is, in my view, I think written so that if you have not been to college, don't have 20 degrees, you can read this book. It will make sense. You will understand what's being said. And I think it's written very clear. I don't think it was not a tussle to read this book. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I learned a lot, and it was very reader-friendly, I felt. So, yeah, I think if you're out there, you're listening to the program, yes, I would recommend this book. Pick up a copy and pay particular attention. It's Chapter 6, Climbing the Up Escalator, White Advantages in Wealth Accumulation. Excellent chapter. Could you tell us which author wrote that chapter, by the way?
Betsy Leander Wright, and she was our white author and explored her own family background and discovered that, in fact, her family had gotten land even before the Homestead Act from the governor that was from England even before the United States was formed. So that was the basis of her family's wealth. And she's not from a very, very wealthy family, but she really recognizes that that's where she got her start. I just wanted to mention that when I was a kid, I used to hear this rhyme, and it went, "Ching Chong Chinaman sitting on a fence, trying to make $1 out of 15 cents." Now, I was maybe your age, Justice, and I was like, what does that mean? Why is this Chinaman trying to make $1 out of 15 cents? Nobody can do that. But then recently when I was looking at the numbers on wealth and found out that people of color in general only have about 15 cents to the white dollar, I was like, oh, I get this now. White people and people of color are working equally hard, but our hard work only produces 15 cents, where their work produces $1. So, you know, it's not that nobody is working hard. We're all working hard, but the rules of the game are fixed, and that's what we have to change.
Before we wrap things up, I want to check our callers to see if anybody had questions left. 720, you did say you had another question. If you'd like to go ahead and ask.
Yes, Miss Lui, do you accept the classification of Asian?
I do. And the reason I do is that we are generally from Asia, so I don't really object to the term.
Oh, okay. Okay. And one final question. I wasn't sure if you answered my question as to whether or not, regarding wealth, you knew any Asian women personally who had spoken about that when they married or were with a white male.
No, I don't think that they would. I don't know anyone who would have spoken of it personally, but I certainly do know, and there has been a writing and investigation of the motives of, especially as I said, immigrant women from China, but not just from Asia. There are certainly women who become brides of Americans from Eastern Europe as well, and they are clearly seeking a better, more wealthy life, if you will. So I think there is certainly that factor that goes on. But I think everyone in making choices, I think that people from very poor countries have less choices than people who have a little bit more resources. So their choices might be, like Justice says, they might be more in that jar, and they might not see how to get out. So marriage might be a way for them to get out of that jar. I would also just say that marriage is something that increases everybody's wealth. When you have two income families, and there is some data on this, you're much more likely to have more wealth than if you're single, either a single man or a single woman. But single men do have more wealth, more assets than single women. But it is married couples that have the most. And I think, again, there are probably rules that provide benefits for marriage because our society really encourages and wants people to be married. But not that it's the best thing for all of us, but the rules also help people that are married maintain more wealth.
One last quick question. When you say the women from Eastern Europe, do you mean white women?
Yes.
Okay.
We wrap up. I wanted to check 253 or the, I believe it's non-white female who said she's about to make her trip to China. If either of you all have a question before we wrap things up, you're on the line.
Nope, I'm all done with questions.
Oh, okay. The female that's about to go to China, if you're still there, if you have a question before we wrap things up, go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. Do you have a question?
I just wanted to say it's a great show, and thank you for having the author on. And I learned so much about our differences, Asian and also there was a book that I read about a couple of years ago. It was called Africans and Asian, like how they used to trade back then. It was extremely interesting. I purchased it in one of those thrift stores, and it was just like a whole section of history that was just black out, because when you look at Zimbabwe, a lot of names like Tendai, and when I'm looking at, Asian culture, they have those kind of names. Shanghai, those are names that the people in Zimbabwe name their kids.
That's a really interesting point. But there was trade between China and Africa on a very equal and respectful basis back in the 1400s.
Exactly. So there's a lot of culture interplay and different stuff like that, and unfortunately, we're only getting half of the story and that, everything.
You're absolutely right, and thank you for that. And just really thank you all for allowing me to be on the program. I really found all of your comments and questions helpful, and hopefully we will talk again sometime.
I would thoroughly enjoyed it. I thoroughly enjoyed the book. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and chat with us. Found it very constructive. Was an excellent recommendation. Before we get out, could you tell them it's in the chat room, but if you could tell them the website in case people are listening and they're not at Blog Talk Radio, so how they can get in contact with you all at the Insight Center for Community Economic Development.
Yes, absolutely. It is www.insightcced.org, but there's also, you can go directly to www.racialwealthgap.org. And let me just say that we wrote the book not as an end in and of itself, but as a vehicle to get more people knowledgeable about this topic in order to mount a campaign to change the rules so that we can close the racial wealth gap.
Outstanding. Thoroughly appreciated you speaking with us today on the program. I learned a ton, and I think people in the chat room have said the same thing, that they learned a ton and they appreciated your poise in answering questions that were tough at times. Thank you a ton for coming on the program. We would love to have you back to hear more. Oh, Justice, yes.
I'm looking at a flyer, and I want to share it. The collections and paintings of Roger, I don't really know what the Yellow Terror, always a foreigner, I forgot what that word is, but on display September 11th, 2009 to April 18th, 2010. The Wing Luke Asian Museum.
Oh, that's here in Seattle. They're having a museum on, it was Yellow Peril, is that it?
Yellow Terror.
Wow.
Great. That's the Wing Luke Museum. It is a fabulous museum if any of you have a chance to go there. And in it you will learn a lot about what the Chinese Americans went through in Seattle. And I just have to say quickly, since you're in Seattle, my father, when he first came to this country, landed in Seattle, Chinatown. And he was a boy of about 12, Justice. But the interesting thing is segregation was so strong at that time that when he died at the age of 95, he still spoke with a Chinese accent, still totally identified as Chinese, had not really gotten assimilated. I mean, when we see kids today that immigrate, within a few years they're really, rapping away. And but segregation at that time was really strong for the Chinese as well as other groups. So thanks for that resource, Justice.
Thank you for sharing that as well. I'm going to try and get down to the museum. I would like to check that out. That sounds
Thank you.
Very interesting. Wow. But yeah, that'll be another show maybe. Again, Meizhu.
If you think of the month of May and June,
Meizhu Lui. There we
go.
Meizhu Lui. Thank you again for coming on the program. Thoroughly appreciated it, and definitely would look.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Just wanted to share my email.
Oh, that's right. Go ahead.
justice.asap@yahoo.com.
Say that one more time for us, please.
justice.asap@yahoo.com.
Outstanding.
And
That way
thank you for your show and the constructive information that you give on really important central topic of our society.
Thank you. Continue to do the outstanding work that you are doing. We will definitely hit the website, and would love to have you back on the show as soon as it's convenient for you to continue the discussion.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We will definitely be in touch. Have a wonderful weekend, and please have a safe and enjoyable time in Hawaii.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye, Justice.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning into the program. I hope you found it constructive. If you did not think the program was constructive, please find something better to do with your time and energy. We do not want to waste any time for anyone listening to the show if they don't feel like they're learning anything or it's helpful to them. But I think today's program was fabulous. I was very impressed with our guest, Meizhu Lui. Excellent information. As I said, I suspected she was going to be very constructive because her book, or the book that she co-authored, outstanding. I would recommend it. Again, it is The Color of Wealth. Subtitle is The Story Behind the U.S. Racial Wealth Divide. You can pick it up. It's in bookstores and the library. I got my copy from the library, but you can pick it up anywhere. Excellent book. Like I said, the chapter on white people and the benefits that they get in the system of white supremacy, outstanding. Pay particular attention to that chapter. Might even see if I can get the white person who authored that chapter to come on the show. She said that's Betsy
Leander Wright.
Leander Wright, thank you. Betsy Leander Wright. I might see if I can get her to come on the program, but I thought that chapter was excellent, and the entire book was excellent. I learned a ton. Maybe if they can get a kid's version later on so Justice can read it, that'd be my only recommendation, but I felt it was excellent. Justice, did you have any thoughts on today's program?
No, but thank you.
Right on. I'm going to try and get myself down to the Wayne Luke Museum as well to check out the exhibit that Justice shared on the program. I would love to see that. That sounds like it would have a lot of interesting information about probably how white supremacy has been practiced against Asian people in this particular area. I would love to learn more about that. There might be some people that would be willing to come on the program to talk about that exhibit. So I'll follow up. You can check in on the cows down the road to see if I can get anybody to come on the program to share more about that exhibit and what's going on down at the Wayne Luke Museum. Actually, I have a pal that works there, so I should be able to get a hookup. I have to talk to her about that today. But, yeah, the cows, we have a show coming up on Tuesday. Dr. John Hoberman, he is a professor at the University of Texas, Austin. He will be here Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. He'll be talking about his book, Darwin's Athlete. This book is about how black athletes, black males in particular, but black athletes have been mistreated in sports, how even seems we have a lot of successful black athletes, even that perpetuates stereotypes about race and racism, black people being just biologically designed to be great athletes and to go out and do all this wonderful stuff on the field or on the basketball court. He also, very interesting, he talks about how the accomplishments of some black athletes end up being blown out of proportion as though this is somehow conquering the system of white supremacy, which is totally not true, and he points this out in his book. He goes back to cite Jack Johnson, the early 20th century. He also cites Jackie Robinson, Muhammad Ali, Michael Jordan. Excellent read. I'm very happy I found it. He'll be here on Tuesday. It is 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. We'll be back Thursday. Aurelia Gross, she is a professor at the University of Southern California. This is still rippling from when Dr. Martin Kevorkian was on the program. He recommended her book, What Blood Won't Tell. This book is about how the system of white supremacy has evolved, how white people defined what they were going to be, how they defined what it meant to be a white person in the system of white supremacy, and even what it meant for white people who had non-white people in their family tree somewhere still being able to practice racism, white supremacy. Very interesting book, and as I said, this is recommended by Dr. Martin Kevorkian, who also recommended Professor Ian Hani Lopez, White by Law. So if you heard that show and thought it was constructive, I suspect Dr. Kevorkian will be 2 for 2 with great recommendations. And the show after that will be Sunday. Then we'll have John Patash. He is a white author. He wrote the book, The FBI's Attack on Tupac Shakur and Other Black Leaders. Hopefully you all checked out the program with Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly, where we talked about COINTELPRO and how white people who practice racism, white supremacy in the FBI attacked black people who were participating in the civil rights movement to replace white supremacy with justice. And Dr. O'Reilly said they ended up just attacking black people, period, whether they were doing anything or not. John Patash, he'll be on the program to talk about how those programs continue and FBI surveillance of Mr. Tupac Shakur, perhaps even their involvement in his demise, and other black leaders. He'll be on the program not tomorrow, but a week from tomorrow. That'll be at 7:30 p.m. Eastern and 4:30 p.m. Pacific. So we'll have 3 shows this coming up week. If you enjoy the cows, should be a great week. I think that's going to do it for today. Oh, my gosh. God. Justice, if you have a comment or what have you, go ahead. I had one other thing to share, and then we can close this one out. But, Justice, do you have any comments or thoughts on today's program? Justice, are you there?
Oh, sorry about that.
Oh, you're good.
Very sorry. What was your question?
I just asked if you had any comments or thoughts about today's program or anything you wanted to say before we ended the show.
Yeah. Is she gonna come back on any other shows?
I hope so. I thought she was outstanding. I thought she had a lot of helpful things to share, and I just enjoyed talking to her. I would love to have her back on the program. I'm going to see if we can get her back in the future, so I hope so.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. I thought you had fabulous questions. I was glad you were able to hang out for the program, and I'm looking forward to the show on Tuesday. The thing I wanted to share before we close out, Jessica Pettit, for those of you all who remember, admitted white supremacist known as Jessica Pettit. She's been on 2 shows. She commented that, among other things, that she felt it was foolish for me to reference myself as a victim of white supremacy. She didn't say that it was not true. She just said it was foolish. And she also said that she felt mistreated because we do not address so-called homosexual activity on this program, and she identifies as a so-called lesbian, and she felt mistreated that we didn't address that. So I asked Mr. Neely Fuller, Jr. if he would be willing to do a program with Ms. Pettit to discuss those 2 issues, his stance on homosexual behavior and his use of the term victim. He said he would be more than willing. He said he has written a book about it. He's very open about it. No problem speaking honest on it. I asked Jessica Pettit, and she said no. She's done. I don't want to talk about it. And got off the phone. Then she emailed me and told me to not contact her ever again. Don't email me. Don't call me. Then she went online and commented on the second show where she was on the cow. She went and wrote an elaborate comment to detail this conversation. So you can go check that out and see what she wrote. But at the end of the day, unadmitted white supremacists, in my view, continuing to practice racism.
So is she gonna go? So is Jessica Pettit gonna come on the show again?
She is not. She absolutely refused, and she asked that I not contact her ever again.
So, well, I suspect that she practices white supremacy.
Well, she does. She admitted to doing so, and I suspect she was practicing white supremacy when she refused to come on the program, and she wasn't she wasn't courteous, I'll say. I did not feel I was treated well. But, that's the system of white supremacy. I do not expect to be treated well by white people. And I didn't expect her to be able to defend her point of view on those two issues. I didn't expect her to be able to defend those publicly. She admits that we're in a system of white supremacy. She agreed to my definition. She admitted to practicing white supremacy. Got to have victims. I am one as a black male, but, oh well. End of that chapter. We'll be moving forward. We have lots of great programs coming down the road. As I said, please join the Facebook group. You can click it. It's on the show page at Blog Talk Radio. And please check the blog, racism-notes.blogspot.com. 2 brand new counter-racist film reviews, and I should have another report on my blog coming up soon. So check the blog, new information, and we will be back on Tuesday evening, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, with Dr. John Hoberman. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And again, thanks to Meizhu Lui. Excellent information. Get her book and check the website. Thank Non-Mighty Wick, Back of the Bus, and Kim. All of them contributed to making this a great program. Thank you for your support. This is the Cow signing off. Justice and Gus T. Renegade. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back in 3 days. Peace.